The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan village as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his tactical gear. His SEAL team had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks through the mountainous terrain. Intelligence suggested their mark was hiding in this remote settlement, using civilians as human shields. "Eyes on target building," whispered Petty Officer Davis through the comm. 2 guards visible on the roof. Jake studied the compound through his scope. The mission was supposed to be clean and quick. Get in, capture, or eliminate the target. Get out. But something felt different about this place. The village was too quiet, even for early morning. The team moved like shadows through the narrow streets. Years of training had made them invisible, deadly, efficient in their silence. Jake's heart rate remained steady as they approached the target building. This was their 100th mission together. Maybe more. Each man knew exactly what the others would do before they did it. "Breach in 30 seconds, Jake whispered into his mic. That's when they heard the explosion. The blast came from 2 streets over, followed immediately by automatic gunfire. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized they had walked into a trap. The real target wasn't in this building. They were the target. "Contact left! Contact left!" shouted Sergeant Rodriguez as bullets started flying from multiple directions. The team scattered, taking cover behind crumbling walls and abandoned vehicles. Jake's mind raced as he tried to assess the situation. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and cut off from their extraction point. "Morrison, we've got civilians in the crossfire," Davis called out, pointing to a small group huddled near a collapsed building. Among the civilians, Jake spotted an elderly man clutching his chest, blood seeping through his fingers. Next to him, a young woman in traditional Afghan dress knelt beside him, her hands pressed against his wound. Even from a distance, Jake could see she was trying to stop the bleeding. "We need to move those people to safety," Jake decided. "Rodriguez, covering fire. Davis, you're with me." The 2 SEALs sprinted across the open ground, bullets kicking up dust around their boots. Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with combat, but something was different this time. As they reached the civilians, the young woman looked up at him. Her eyes were the clearest blue he had ever seen. "English?" Jake asked quickly, crouching beside her. She nodded, never taking her hands off the wounded man's chest. "He's losing too much blood. The artery is severed." Jake was surprised by her calm, clinical assessment. Most civilians would be screaming or frozen with fear. This woman was working methodically, applying pressure in exactly the right spot. "We need to get you all out of here," Jake said, but she shook her head. "If I move my hands, he dies in 2 minutes." Another burst of gunfire erupted nearby. Rodriguez was doing his best to keep the attackers at bay, but they were running low on ammunition. "Can you carry him?" the woman asked Jake. Without hesitation, Jake scooped up the elderly man, while the woman kept her hands in position. Together, they ran toward better cover, the rest of the civilians following behind them. They ducked into the ruins of what used to be a school building. Jake set the man down carefully as bullets continued to fly outside. The woman immediately went back to work on the wound, tearing strips from her clothing to create makeshift bandages. "What's your name?" Jake asked. "Layla," she replied, not looking up from her patient. Jake watched her work. Her movements were too precise, too confident. This wasn't someone who had picked up basic first aid from necessity. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Rodriguez, status report," Jake spoke into his comm. "We're pinned down, but I think I see a way out through the back alley. How are our new friends?" Jake looked at Layla, who was now successfully stemming the bleeding. "Stable, thanks to our guide here." The fighting continued for another 20 minutes. Jake's team managed to eliminate several of the attackers and create a corridor for escape. As they prepared to move, Layla helped the elderly man to his feet. "Can you walk?" she asked him in Pashto, then translated for Jake. He says yes, but slowly. The group began moving toward the extraction point. Jake noticed how Layla positioned herself to support not just the wounded man, but also helped coordinate the movement of the other civilians. She seemed to anticipate where cover would be needed, where the safest paths lay. When they finally reached the helicopter landing zone, Jake felt a mixture of relief and confusion. The mission had been a disaster, but they had all survived. More importantly, they had managed to save several innocent lives. As the civilians were loaded onto a medical helicopter, Jake found himself watching Layla again. She was giving instructions to the military medics, explaining the elderly man's condition and what treatment he had received. "Sir," Davis approached Jake, "Command wants a full debrief in 1 hour." Jake nodded, but his attention remained on Layla. Something about her didn't add up. Her knowledge of medical procedures, her calm under fire, the way she had managed the other civilians during their escape, it all pointed to training that went far beyond what a village woman would typically have. "Excuse me," Jake called to her as she was about to board the helicopter. She turned, those blue eyes meeting his again. "Thank you," he said simply. She smiled, and for just a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw something else in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Or perhaps the look of someone who had been in similar situations before. "Take care of yourself, soldier," she replied. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Layla and the other civilians to safety. Jake stood in the landing zone, dust cloud, watching until the aircraft disappeared over the mountains. "Something wrong, boss?" Rodriguez asked. Jake shook his head, but the feeling remained. Layla was no ordinary civilian. Every instinct he had developed over years of special operations was telling him there was more to her story. Back at base, during the debriefing, Jake found himself thinking about those blue eyes and the confident way she had treated the wounded man. He had worked with military medics who weren't as skilled as she had been. "Morrison, you with us?" Colonel Henderson's voice brought him back to reality. "Yes, sir. Just thinking about how that civilian woman probably saved that old man's life." Speaking of which, Henderson consulted his notes. "We've got reports that the civilian rescue was handled exceptionally well. Good work out there." Jake nodded, accepting the praise, but his mind was elsewhere. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time he encountered the mysterious woman named Layla. That night, as Jake tried to sleep in his bunk, he couldn't shake the image of her blue eyes. There had been something familiar about her. Something that nagged at the edge of his memory. He had met thousands of people during his deployments, but very few had left such a lasting impression. He made a mental note to ask around about her. In his experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. And a village woman with advanced medical training who stayed calm under fire definitely seemed too good to be true. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Jake found himself hoping he was wrong. For once in his military career, he hoped that what seemed like a coincidence really was just that, because the alternative meant that Layla was hiding something significant, and that could put both of them in danger. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself back in the same region, but this time the mission was different. His team was tasked with rescuing 2 captured aid workers who had been taken by insurgents. The intelligence was solid this time, no ambushes expected. The rescue operation went smoothly. Too smoothly, Jake thought as they extracted the 2 relief workers from a cave complex in the mountains. But he pushed aside his suspicions as they made their way to the pickup point. "Medic," Davis called out suddenly. Jake spun around to see one of the rescued aid workers collapse. The woman, a doctor named Sarah Chen, had hidden a severe leg wound throughout their escape. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, she was going into shock. "I've got her," said their team medic, Petty Officer Johnson. But as he knelt beside the woman, Jake heard a familiar voice. "Elevate her legs and check for internal bleeding." Jake turned to see Layla emerging from behind a cluster of rocks. She wore different clothes this time. Practical hiking gear instead of traditional dress. But there was no mistaking those blue eyes. "What are you doing here?" Jake asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. "Same thing you are," Layla replied calmly, kneeling beside the injured woman. "Helping people." Johnson looked confused as Layla began examining the patient with practiced efficiency. "Sir, who is this?" "Someone we met before," Jake said carefully, studying Layla's movements. "Layla, right?" She nodded, not looking up from her work. "The wound is deeper than it looks. You need to apply pressure here and here." She guided Johnson's hands to the correct positions. She's lucky. A few more hours and she would have bled out internally. Jake watched in amazement as Layla worked alongside his trained military medic. Her knowledge was definitely not that of an ordinary civilian. The way she assessed the patient, her understanding of field medicine, even her terminology, it all pointed to professional training. "Where did you learn to do that?" Jake asked directly. This time Layla did look up, and Jake saw something new in her expression. Caution. "I've helped people before," she said simply. "That's not an answer." Before Layla could respond, they heard helicopters approaching. The extraction team was arriving ahead of schedule. "We'll continue this conversation later," Jake said as they prepared to move the patients. But when the helicopters landed and the dust settled, Layla was gone. Jake spent the next hour searching the area with Davis, but found no trace of her. It was as if she had simply vanished into the mountains. "Boss." "With respect." "What's going on?" Davis asked, as they finally gave up the search. "You've been acting strange ever since that woman showed up," Jake sighed. "Something doesn't add up about her. This is the second time she's appeared out of nowhere with medical skills that most civilians don't have. Maybe she's a doctor who got caught up in the conflict?" "Maybe," Jake replied, but he didn't believe it. Back at base, Jake decided to do some investigating. He accessed the database of aid workers and medical personnel in the region, searching for anyone named Layla. He found nothing. Next, he checked the records from their previous mission. The official report listed several civilians rescued, but there were no detailed identities provided. The bureaucracy of war had swallowed Layla's existence. Growing frustrated, Jake reached out to his intelligence contacts. If Layla was who he was beginning to suspect she might be, there would be traces somewhere in the classified systems. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from Naval Intelligence called him back within hours. "Jake, I found something interesting about your mystery woman, but I need to see you in person to discuss it." They met in a secure conference room the next morning. Mitchell slid a file across the table, but kept her hand on it. "Before I show you this, I need to ask, why are you looking for this person?" Jake had expected the question. "She's appeared twice at locations where we've been operating. Both times she demonstrated medical skills beyond what a civilian should have. I'm concerned she might be gathering intelligence." Mitchell studied his face carefully. "Your concern is noted and understood. But what I'm about to show you might change your perspective." She opened the file and revealed a photograph that made Jake's breath catch. It was Layla, but wearing a military uniform. The insignia showed she was a Navy lieutenant. "Lieutenant Layla Hassan," Mitchell explained. "Navy SEAL medic, deployed to this region 18 months ago. Officially, she's missing in action, presumed dead." Jake stared at the photograph, pieces of a puzzle finally starting to come together. SEAL medic? One of the first women to complete the program. She was working deep cover, gathering intelligence on insurgent medical supply chains, when her team was ambushed. She was the only survivor, but her body was never recovered. The room felt suddenly cold. If she's alive, why hasn't she made contact? Mitchell closed the file. "That's what we'd like to know. There are several possibilities. She could be suffering from amnesia due to head trauma. She might be working undercover and can't break cover. Or she's been compromised and is working for the other side," Jake finished. "It's a possibility we have to consider." Jake shook his head. "No. I've seen her in action twice. She's risked her life to save innocent people. If she was compromised, she wouldn't be helping civilians. Unless helping civilians is her cover for something else." The meeting ended with Jake being given a new mission. Locate Layla Hassan and determine her status. If she was alive and operational, bring her in for debriefing. If she was compromised, neutralize the threat. Jake left the meeting with mixed emotions. Relief that his instincts had been correct. Layla was indeed more than she appeared to be. But also concern about what her situation really was. That evening, Jake sat in his quarters, studying everything he could find about Layla Hassan. Her record was impressive. Top of her class in medical training, exceptional marks in survival and evasion courses, multiple commendations for bravery under fire. The photo showed a woman in perfect military bearing, but Jake could see the same intelligent eyes that had looked at him across that dusty Afghan village. His teammate Davis knocked on his door. "Boss, we just got word of another mission. Convoy escort duty through the mountain passes." Jake looked up from the files. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Same area where we've been operating." Jake felt a familiar stirring of intuition. "Put together our gear." "And Davis?" "Yeah, boss. Make sure our medical kit is fully stocked. Something tells me we're going to need it." As Davis left, Jake returned to studying Layla's file. Somewhere in those mountains was a fellow SEAL who had been missing for over a year, someone who had apparently been surviving on her own, helping people while staying hidden from both friend and foe. Tomorrow, Jake decided, he was going to find out why. He spent the rest of the evening planning. If Layla was operating in the area, she would likely be monitoring radio traffic. Military convoys were attractive targets for insurgents, which meant they were also places where medical assistance might be needed. Jake had a growing suspicion that tomorrow's convoy escort would bring him face to face with Layla Hassan once again, and this time, he was going to get the answers he needed, regardless of what orders he might be disobeying in the process. Looking at her photograph one more time, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He was going to trust his instincts about Layla, even if it meant going against Naval Intelligence's suspicions. After all, SEALs took care of their own, and Layla Hassan was one of them. The convoy came under attack, exactly where Jake expected it would. The mountain pass had always been dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and a sheer drop on the other. It was the perfect place for an ambush, which is why Jake had positioned his team strategically throughout the convoy. When the first RPG hit the lead vehicle, Jake was already moving. "Contact front! Contact front!" Rodriguez shouted into his comm as automatic weapons fire erupted from the rocky outcroppings above them. The convoy ground to a halt as vehicles swerved to avoid the burning wreckage ahead. Jake could see at least 3 wounded soldiers crawling away from the destroyed truck. "Davis, get those men to cover. Johnson, treat the wounded." But as Jake coordinated his team's response, he kept scanning the mountainside. Somewhere up there, hidden among the rocks and sparse vegetation, Layla Hassan was probably watching, and if she was the SEAL he believed her to be, she wouldn't be able to stay hidden while people were dying. The firefight intensified as more insurgents revealed their positions. Jake's team was outnumbered, but their training and equipment gave them the advantage. Slowly, methodically, they began to turn the tide. That's when Jake saw movement on a ledge 50 feet above the convoy. A figure in local clothing was making its way down the cliff face with impossible speed and precision. Jake recognized the climbing technique immediately. It was military rappelling without ropes, using only hand and footholds that most people wouldn't even notice. The figure reached the convoy just as Johnson was struggling with a severely wounded soldier. Jake watched as Layla appeared beside his medic, her hands already moving to assess the patient. "Multiple fragment wounds to the abdomen," she called out, her voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing gunfire. "I need gauze and pressure bandages now." "If you much pressure," Johnson looked up, startled, but handed over the medical supplies without question. "In combat, you didn't argue with someone who knew what they were doing." Jake fought his way over to them, providing covering fire as Layla worked. "We meet again," he said. "Not by coincidence this time," Layla replied, not looking up from her patient. "I've been monitoring your radio traffic. I knew this convoy would be hit. Why didn't you warn us? Because you wouldn't have believed me. And because this was the only way to get close enough to talk." Jake felt a bullet whine past his ear and returned fire at the muzzle flash above them. "Talk about what?" "About why I can't come home." Before Jake could respond, a new threat emerged. A second group of insurgents was flanking their position from the south, threatening to surround the convoy entirely. "Jake," Rodriguez called out, "we've got company coming up the road." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Even with Layla's help treating the wounded, they were running out of ammunition and options. That's when Layla stood up and did something that made Jake's blood freeze. She started climbing back up the cliff face. "Where are you going?" Jake shouted. "To end this," she called back. Jake watched in amazement as Layla scaled the near-vertical rock face with inhuman speed. Within minutes, she had disappeared over the top of the ridge. The gunfire from above suddenly became sporadic, then stopped altogether. "What the hell just happened?" Davis asked, appearing at Jake's side. "I think our guardian angel just went to work," Jake replied. 5 minutes later, Layla's voice crackled over their radio frequency. Somehow she had acquired a military radio. "SEAL team, this is Ghost 6. Hostile positions neutralized. You have a clear path to the north." Jake keyed his radio. "Ghost 6, identify yourself." There was a long pause before Layla's voice came back, softer this time. "Lieutenant Layla Hassan, Navy SEALs. Serial number 5547 Delta Romeo. Still alive. Still fighting." The convoy was able to extract successfully, but Jake made sure his team was the last to leave. As the final helicopter prepared to depart, he spotted Layla standing on a distant ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. He keyed his radio one more time. "Ghost 6, you're coming with us." "Negative. I can't." "That's an order, Lieutenant." Again, a long pause. "With respect, sir, you're not my commanding officer anymore." Jake felt frustration and concern warring in his chest. "Layla, whatever happened to your team, whatever you think you did wrong, we can work through it. But you need to come home." "I can't come home, because home doesn't know the whole truth." "What truth?" The radio was silent for so long that Jake thought she had gone. Then, barely audible, "The ambush that killed my team wasn't random. Someone sold us out. Someone with access to our mission parameters and extraction routes." Jake felt cold understanding wash over him. "You're saying there's a mole. I'm saying that when I try to come home, whoever betrayed my team will know I survived. And they'll finish what they started." "So you've been hiding out here for over a year?" "I've been investigating, following money trails, tracking communications, building a case. But I'm not ready yet." Jake made a decision that went against every protocol he had ever learned. "What do you need?" "Time. And someone I can trust to help me from the inside when I'm ready to surface." "You've got it." "Jake," Layla's voice carried a note of warning. "If you're wrong about trusting me, this conversation could get us both killed. If I'm wrong about trusting you, we're both in the wrong line of work." The helicopter pilot was signaling urgently that they needed to leave. Jake keyed his radio one final time. "How do I contact you when you're ready?" "You don't. I'll contact you." "And Jake, thank you for believing in me when everyone else thinks I'm dead." As the helicopter lifted off, Jake caught one final glimpse of Layla on the ridge. She raised her hand in a brief salute, before disappearing into the rocks. During the flight back to base, Jake's mind raced with the implications of what he had learned. A missing SEAL who had discovered evidence of betrayal within their own ranks. A woman who had been surviving alone in hostile territory for over a year. Helping people while building a case against a traitor. Davis leaned over and shouted above the helicopter noise. "Boss, what are you going to put in your report?" Jake looked out at the mountains below, knowing that somewhere down there, Layla Hassan was continuing her lonely mission. Contact with insurgents resulted in multiple enemy casualties. No friendly personnel missing or captured. Mission successful. It wasn't the complete truth, but Jake had learned that sometimes the complete truth was more dangerous than a well-crafted lie. Back at base, Jake filed his report exactly as he had told Davis he would. But privately, he began his own investigation. If Layla was right about a mole in their organization, Jake was going to help her find the truth. He started by carefully reviewing the files on Layla's original mission, looking for any anomalies in the intelligence that had led to her team's ambush. What he found, buried in the operational details, made his blood run cold. The intelligence that had led Layla's team into the ambush had come from the same source that had provided the information for Jake's first encounter with her. Someone had been playing a very long game, and Jake was beginning to understand that he and his team had been pawns in it from the beginning. As he sat in his quarters that night, Jake realized that the woman he had thought was a mysterious civilian, then a missing SEAL, was actually something far more important. She was the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of their command structure. And tomorrow, Jake decided he was going to start helping her prove it. Because regardless of orders, regulations, or career consequences, Layla Hassan was a fellow SEAL who needed backup, and SEALs never left their own behind, even when their own command structure couldn't be trusted. Jake opened his laptop and began typing a carefully coded message that would be meaningless to anyone monitoring communications, but would tell Layla Hassan that she wasn't alone anymore. The war was about to get much more complicated, but for the first time since meeting those blue eyes in an Afghan village, Jake felt like he was finally on the right side of the fight.